Here's the Connection Pointe Worldview question of the week. Is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh.
Or is it a taco? Some may never know.
Maybe
Welcome
it's
to the
its
Connection
own
Pointe World.
thing.
What, Zach? What?
Maybe it's its own thing.
Oh,
It's
maybe.
another
That was
That's-
not an option.
Okay. Well, thankfully, that's not what we're addressing today on the Connection Pointe Worldview Podcast that is designed to help you as a parent or guardian go deeper into places your student has already gone. I'm here, as always, with Zach Brightenbach, Doctor, Pastor, Right Reverend Zach Brightenbach. Hello.
Hello.
And Pastor Trey Shigley, also Reverend Pastor Trey Shigley, minus the doctor. Hello.
Hello. If I have my masters, do you get to call me master or?
Oh, yeah,
Zach?
Master. That's like a
Yeah.
Jedi thing
Yeah, there we
almost.
go.
So, yeah, Master Trey.
Yeah, on the
Um,
level of Zach, that's for sure.
That sounds good. Well, I'm so excited because this is week 3 in a series that you guys are working through. You already did this with the students, the middle schoolers, recently for their fall break. It's called Worldview Week. A bunch of middle schoolers come spend their week voluntarily, mostly, you said, Trey, to really learn deeper about the faith and some aspects of worldview. And then in the afternoons and evenings, you go out and have fun and do a bunch of fun stuff, but then they have fun in the morning learning some really, really important stuff. The important stuff that you guys worked through a week or so ago was a whole series on ethics, which, again, is incredible that middle schoolers are learning about ethics and
Philosophers and
how that fits in with a biblical Christian worldview at all, as a distinct kind of avenue of philosophy that we're discovering. Dr. Zach is an expert there, and all the what is it? Is it weirdo? Is that the classic term for philosopher?
Pretty much.
That's the,
I'm not getting my body preserved if you watch the last episode.
Yeah. If
I'm not that weird.
you missed the last couple, go back and listen because it's worth it.
That's a good teaser to go back and
Yeah,
the last one.
exactly. A story about someone whose head was preserved, okay? Episode 2. Don't miss it. Trey, you want to briefly remind us of what you've done so far in the ethics series and then introduce us to the topic of lesson 3 that we'll discuss right now.
Absolutely. So the big idea of what we're hoping to do in this series and what we did throughout the week is introduce just the idea of ethics, ethical systems, and then go through a few specific ethical frameworks or theories and kind of show how they work and how they kind of fall a little bit flat, and then how the Christian framework and ethics really is the most solid and trustworthy. And so what we've covered so far is talking about what is ethics. Ethics is just how you ought to live, what's the right thing to do, how do you know what the right thing to do is, and it guides us on how to make moral choices. So that's what ethics is. And then we've talked about utilitarianism, which is all about trying to make decisions based on the framework of creating the most happiness for the most amount of people. And so, and then in this series, or in this lesson, we're wanting to talk about Kant and kind of his theory on ethics and how that all plays out.
Okay, so Dr. Zach, tell us, if you can, tell us about Immanuel Kant and how his ethical theory differs from utilitarianism. Immanuel Kant.
Yeah,
It would be funny if you said, no, I can't.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Can
good
you or
Kant
can't you?
jokes.
Tell me.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Not quite as interesting as Jeremy Bentham that we talked about last time, but still, he's got a lot of quirks and he's a lot of fun. So he lived his entire life in a town called Königsberg, Germany, and he never really traveled more than like 10 miles from his hometown his whole life. So not exactly the adventurous type, but he was born in 1724, died in 1804. He was very regimented, like a human alarm clock. He followed a very strict daily routine. So people in his town would say that they could set their watches by when he took his walk, because it was always at the same time. And so, he'd eat and teach and write and walk at all the times of the same day. He was a very short guy, about 5 feet tall, never married, very strict German philosopher of the 1700s, very influenced by Enlightenment thinking, which we're going to talk about here pretty soon and what that is. But Kant is he came up with his own theory of ethics, and it is very different from what we talked about last time with utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is focused on consequences, really, and specific consequences, making as many people as happy as possible. Well, Kant didn't care about consequences. He says you have a duty. And reason leads you to know what your duty is. We're going to talk about that later and how he gets there. But he thinks we do have a duty, and you can know what it is, and it doesn't matter the consequences. It doesn't matter how anyone's going to feel about it. It doesn't matter if it makes you miserable, other people miserable. There are moral duties that we can use, that we can determine through our thinking, through our reason, and that is going to tell us how we should act in every situation. So happiness, feelings, consequences, doesn't matter. We have a duty. You might think about Call of Duty. Actually, we have a really cool picture I made with AI to put in this slide where Kant is on the Call of Duty cover with a big gun. But
once he learned how to make pictures with AI, it was game over.
Yeah,
Watch out,
an
world.
Animal. But he's all about duty, so hopefully that helps them remember that.
Oh, I can't believe it. This will be endless sort of Kant puns. So Kant lived during a time in history called the Enlightenment. Tell us about that and how it influenced his ethical theory, Trey.
Yeah, so the Enlightenment was a really influential period of time in history from the late 1600s to the early 1800s in Europe. And it's when people were really into kind of reason and thinking for yourself. And kind of the main thing is that you don't have to take into account history or religion or religious texts. Like, you can use reason and figure out the world.
Got it.
And the Enlightenment brought a lot of new advancements in the world. And it just really shook up a lot of people's thinking, and it really shifted just towards this idea of we can figure this out. We are humans. We can do this. We can really think hard enough and figure out what right or wrong is and what our moral kind of obligations are. Now, interestingly, Kant didn't believe we get our morality from God, but he did think morality was objective. So right and wrong are real. They're not just opinions. And it doesn't depend on people's thoughts or opinions on it. They stand outside of people's opinions on it. So they are objective, not subjective.
And yet did not believe in God.
And yet does not think that morality comes from God. He actually did believe in God, but he thought morality comes just from our reasoning.
Oh, okay.
But it applies to everybody. It doesn't depend on what you think about it. But we can figure it out without needing God.
So he's got this famous moral rule for determining right and wrong, something he called categorical imperative. Dr. Zach, can you tell us about this rule? Maybe go through some scenarios to show how Kant would apply it.
Yeah. Categorical. The categorical imperative is a 3-part rule that he came up with. He considered it one, but it sort of has 3 components to it, and I'll break down what that is. But why do he call it a categorical imperative or the categorical imperative? Categorical just means applies across the board, right, to everyone at all times. It's categorical. It's not just isolated to a culture or something like this. And imperative means something you got to do, right? So across the board, categorical, imperative, you got to do it. It's a duty. It's a requirement. And he thought that he could figure this out just by thinking about it. And so here's the first part of the categorical imperative, and like kind of the key thing that we really emphasize a lot. Only do something if you think everyone should do it, right? So
Okay.
if it's something that you could rationally wish that everybody did all the time, then that's something that's good and you should do it. It's your duty to do it. But if it would break down and lead to contradictions, or just wouldn't work, or it's not something that, that could possibly be something you would will for everyone to do, then you know that it's wrong. So kind of think about stealing, right? If you would that be something that you would want everyone everywhere to do? And it's like, well, obviously not. Nobody could buy or sell. The economy would crash, and the whole concept of stealing is predicated upon like some people being honest, right? And so you getting away with like being able to steal something that's somebody else's. But the whole system breaks down if everybody were to do that.
Right.
So when you use your reason and your rational mind, you can realize stealing is not something you should do, because it would break down and it would lead to contradictions. It would all fall apart if everybody were to do it. And so you just know this is not something you ought to be doing.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the first kind of part of his three-part categorical imperative. The second part is just all humans have value, so treat them with respect. And he thought this does not come from the fact we're made in God's image or something like this. This comes from just reason. When you think about it, we're all rational creatures. We all value ourselves, and we all want to be treated as though we're a valued, rational creature. And so that's what how we should treat not just ourselves, but everyone else. So that just comes from reason. And then the third part of it is really just we can figure out the first two parts on our own. We don't need God.
Okay.
Right? So that's all that is.
Interesting.
So that's kind of if I was to simplify it and put it in a nutshell, that's basically his categorical imperative. So it kind of helps to look at scenarios to see what Kant would do. So here's a few.
Okay.
So say you didn't study for your test, but you can see a friend's answers on their test, and they're pretty smart. Should you cheat? Well, if everyone cheated when they didn't study, then tests would just become meaningless, right? Nobody would learn.
You don't learn.
You wouldn't want your medical doctor operating on you who kind of cheated their way all the way through and never learned anything, right? Nobody would learn. No one would trust the academic system. The whole thing would break down, right? If everyone cheats, the whole system breaks down. And so it can't work. And so
it can't work.
It can't work. It can't work. So you know that you can't do it. It's out of bounds to cheat.
Okay.
What about this? You're tempted to ignore the elderly and the disabled because you just don't think they contribute much to society and you just don't have much time for them, What would Kant say about that? Well, you have to treat everybody as having inherent worth, not just if they contribute a lot to society. Don't treat them as a means to an end. You should treat all people as ends in themselves, as a rational creature deserves. And if everyone ignored people who seemed less useful, it would lead to just society breaking down in many ways. It would not be something you would wish to be done universally, that kind of thing. So he wouldn't be in favor of that. What about you're thinking of sneaking into a movie without paying? What about that scenario? Well, if everyone did that, movie theaters would break down. You couldn't stay in business. The whole concept of sneaking into a movie theater would be impossible because there would be no movie theaters, and the whole entertainment and movie industry would fall apart. If everyone's trying to sneak in, nobody wants to pay. So you couldn't reasonably want that to be a universal rule. Also, you're using the theater and its workers for your own enjoyment and not respecting them as people. So you wouldn't do that. This all sounds pretty good so far, right? Here's another scenario. You're thinking of cutting in line at lunch. Well, Kant says you shouldn't do that because the whole concept of a line would break down if everybody cut. There just wouldn't be a line. The whole thing would just lead to a contradiction. It would lead to falling apart. No one would get their food. If nobody waits in line, there wouldn't be a line, and so you wouldn't rationally want that to be universal, and it treats others as less important because you're cutting in front of them and not respecting them. Well, what about this kind of scenario? All this, I think, sounds pretty good so far. Here's a classic moral scenario that you hear a lot if you take an ethics class, right? So you're you're in World War II in Nazi Germany. You're hiding some Jewish people in your basement, and the Nazis come to your door and they knock and say, "Hey, are you hiding any Jews?" So what do you do? Do you lie to the Nazis and protect life, or do you tell the truth but hand people over to their death? Well, Kant would say lying is always wrong. And so even to the Nazis in this scenario, nobody should lie, because if you couldn't universalize lying. If everyone lied, then the whole concept of trust and communication would just break down, and you wouldn't want to universalize lying. So even in hard situations like this, where you're telling the truth and it's going to lead to death, remember, consequences are not a factor here.
Got it.
It's really just about rationally could you universalize it. And so in this case, because Kant lived before the time of World War II, so he was never faced with this exact scenario. But he did write about, a murderer is looking for your friend, and would you lie to the murderer? No, he gave his opinion on this. Now, not all Kantian ethicists today would agree with Kant on that, but if that's what Kant thought. One last scenario. So there's a guy whose wife is dying, and he needs a drug to save her life, but he can't afford it, and the pharmacist won't lower the price. He can't get the money in time. Should he steal it? And so Kant would say stealing's always wrong. You couldn't universalize stealing. We already talked about stealing and why you can't universalize that. So Kant would just say, no, yeah, the consequence stinks. You don't want your wife to die, but you would not steal. So those are some scenarios to give you a flavor for applying Kant's theory.
Okay, so we did this last time with the other ethical theory. It's fair, right, to assess both strengths and weaknesses, and just because it's a different theory or worldview than we might have, it doesn't mean they're without strength. So Trey, what would you say are some of the biggest strengths of Kant's ethical theory?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones is that it recognizes that morality is objective. It's not something we make up. We can use our minds to discover it, but we don't use our minds to just make it up.
Okay.
And it's something that doesn't depend on people's opinions. It's kind of outside of people's opinions. And so that's a really good thing, because it's not depending on, if a whole group of people is like, it should be this, then it changes to that. That's not how it works. And so morality's objective is a really good positive. And as Christians, we think that as well. It respects human value, right? That's one of the decision-making processes you go through. Can you universalize it, and are you respecting humans? And so that's obviously a good thing. And it recognizes that we have real moral duties that we must follow, even if we don't want to. And so it takes into account that sometimes we don't want to do the right thing, but we should do it anyways. And sometimes the consequences are difficult, but we should do the right thing, even if it makes it hard for ourselves. And that's a great thing as well. And then and I kind of touched on this a little bit, but an action can be right or wrong regardless of the consequences.
Okay.
And so again, something like stealing the bike example that we used actually in our last episode, he would say, don't steal the bike because stealing's wrong, even if that makes you sad, and it would make you more happy if you did steal the bike. So you're not making the consequences everything. Sometimes you just need to do the right thing, even if the consequences are difficult for you. And it has a positive that it emphasizes the importance of motives. So why you do something is important, and for Kant, that thing is out of a sense of duty. He thinks that you should do the right thing because it's the right thing, and that really is a good quality to have. So there are a few good strengths to the theory.
Cool. All right. So Zach, what are some of the biggest weaknesses then?
Well, one would be it seems a little rigid sometimes, right? There's no exceptions, even like in the Nazi case, where it just intuitively seems like you ought to not be telling the Nazis that you're hiding these innocent people here and handing them over to their death, just because you're committed to this this rule of universalizing things. And it's like, well, you can never lie, even in a situation like this. I think we're going to see later that sometimes moral duties do come into conflict, and sometimes you might have to choose the higher duty, even though lying is not in itself a good thing. We'll get into that more as we get into the series, but Kant's view is very rigid in that regard. It totally ignores the consequences, would be a second problem, right? I think it's good to not totally base everything on the consequences. Sometimes you do just have a duty, regardless of the results of it. But you also probably shouldn't totally ignore the consequences, too. Sometimes, protecting vulnerable people and avoiding harm is something that should matter, even though, you don't want to lie, ideally, that kind of thing. So consequences can matter. Third would be it tries to justify that there's really objective morality, which is a good thing. But it does that without God as the moral lawgiver. And here I think Kant is going to run into a lot of trouble with trying to ground, and we didn't really talk about this in the course. It goes kind of deep, which I think this is a good topic, though. When we get into the moral argument for God, we get into this a lot. But how can you ground objective morality? What would it take for there to be a real objective moral law? And I think when you really get into that, it's going to require a being such as God to be the source of moral law. And I don't think Kant is right that we can get an objective law that applies to all of us and transcends human opinion without rooting it in a being like God that has some of the qualities of God, being unchanging, transcending humans, being essentially good, and all the rest. A fourth criticism of Kant is it ignores the importance of character, doesn't really talk about virtues at all, right? Trying to become a better person. It's all focused on duty. Duty is important in ethics, but it just ignores the virtue side of things. And we didn't really get into this a lot in the in Worldview Week, but Kant did think that there's more moral value in doing something purely out of duty than doing something because you want to. Right? So if you want to do a good thing and it makes you feel good to do it, then Kant considers that to have less moral value than doing something when you don't want to do it, but you just feel obligated out of a rational sense of recognizing your moral duty.
Wow.
And so I don't think he fully values the importance of growing to become the sort of person and have the sort of character who just naturally wants to do good things. Like, that's actually a good thing when you don't have to always do things out of rational duty, even though you don't really want to. But you do it because you want to, because you're growing morally. There's moral growth in your character.
Sounds like conflict my wife and I have sometimes, where it's like, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do, and she's like, no, I want you to want to do this, right? It's the difference.
Well, Kant would think it's awesome that you don't really want to do it, but you're doing it anyway.
But my wife does not think that's awesome.
And I wouldn't either. I think I think most ethicists would say there's something good about growing in character to like wanting to do the right thing. Kant doesn't really capture that. And a fifth negative, we could say, it doesn't really capture the importance of love and relationships. His system is very impersonal. It's very focused on logic and rules, but not so much about relationships and love. And I think when we get into biblical ethics, we'll see it's very relational. Love for God and others is the greatest command, and morality involves following rules, but the focus probably ought to be bigger than just the rules, and the focus should be on a genuine love for God and others and stuff that Kant doesn't really care about at all.
Yeah, I got to tell you guys, I can't even with this guy. That's my. All right.
That's what I concluded too. Kant's ethical theory just can't work for us as a comprehensive system that guides us morally. It falls short, even though, as Trey was just saying, it has some positive things going for it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Well, we like to wrap up the episodes with a good question that you might be able to discuss with your students. So, Trey, you got one that the parents might be able to chat with about this particular lesson?
Yeah. So if someone agrees with Kant and says that we can have real right and wrong without needing God to be the source of it, what problems might that create?
Man, that's a deep question. That'd be a good
Yeah.
one. Love to be a fly on the wall for some of those conversations. So as you have those, please know that we'll be praying for you and praying for your students.